In this video, we'll be unwrapping the details on the body. And as you can see, I'm changing the color to orange for parts that have already been unwrapped. Now, to keep in mind with these details on the body, a lot of them will be sharing UV space. And the first one we're going to start off with are these windows, because as you might remember, we unwrapped these before we actually got to the actual unwrapping, because we're going to reuse parts of this thing, and when we reuse them, I would prefer not to have to unwrap everything again. So I did some unwrapping in advance here. We have a few things to fix up though. So I created a new polygon here. And if you create new polygons, you just get some sort of random unwrapping for that. So I'm just redoing parts of the unwrapping here. Now, that being said, the fact that I unwrapped these beforehand doesn't mean that I want everything to share. It just means that I want to save myself some work. I could redo all of this from scratch, but if I can save myself some work, I'd just rather do it that way. You can compare it with the hood that had an asymmetrical detail and the front grille. Both of these I used some symmetrical unwrapping first and then went in and adjusted them afterwards. So I did some pre-unwrapping work here first, and then once I have the final models and I'm finally set for unwrapping, I just go in and change them around a bit. So obviously, like the two halves of the windows, I don't want them to always share the same texture. The one with 3 windows, with 2 windows, those will all have unique unwrappings on the front. Same for the sides. I mean, it just wouldn't work to have to repeat this, especially for a normal map, because when you have a single window, both the left and the right side would have slightly beveled edges from the normal map. But when you have a window with 2 and 3 pieces, then obviously you can't use this normal map for that. You need to create a unique unwrapping for it. So I'm going in and just seeing if I can't weld some more stuff, because I might have forgotten it for a few footages, just to be safe. And with that done, I'm going to move these on top of each other, because these will be sharing the same UV space. But I think for these windows, I'm going to do it this way. The ones with 2 windows, so on the left and the right, they're both going to share the same space. The ones with 3, front and back, are going to share the same space. And then there's a few with where there's 1 window. I'm going to have 2 different versions there because they're slightly different. So I can't unwrap them all in the same spot. Mainly in terms of avian occlusion, they also did different depths inside the bulldozer body. So just going over this and selecting some edges to be able to attach. And you can see that these this one's a lot bigger, so there's bigger polygons attached to it. So that's why I have to keep it separate. I'm going to stack this one on top of this one, just so that we can share the UV space. And like instead of like trying really hard to match these vertices on top of each other, I'm just going to use the align to align them in every single way. Okay, so that's it for these parts. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the insides, the actual glass parts. I've unwrapped all of those onto the same spot. They're all shared at the moment. We're going to change this later, but that's something for when we do the final unwrapping. I probably want to have a few different variations there. So next up are these sort of trays that stick out from the top. No clue what they actually are. It's some pretty simple unwrapping. It's just some stitching, putting these parts together. And we're almost there. There are just a few small things left to do. Trying to create like neatly stacked versions every single time. Now this thing here, again, I'm going to go in, and this one I did turn on the unwrapping, so I don't have to manually do it again, which saves me the work of having to use that wrap, which requires a bit more cleanup, but you know, it still works. So I'm just checking that all of the instances of those handles are working, and then these handles as well, gotta make sure they're instances. And this one I can't go back and adjust the spline because I've already collapsed it. So I'm going to have to use that unwrap special unfold tool again. So mainly it works by selecting a loop of rings, but you have to make sure if you select the end or the start. Like you saw me first select it the end, and then it doesn't really want to work. So if you go for the start, then it does work decently. Now for these 2 like attachment brackets, I'm going to stack them on top of each other. No point in unwrapping these uniquely. And for such a small part, I don't bother with the actual align method. For larger parts, it makes a difference, but for small ones, it doesn't really. Okay, so again, fold here. This sort of attachment point for ropes or chains. I'm going to stitch these things together and then use the align from text tools to align that one. And also use an align on these parts just to make sure that they sit perfectly straight. And then just try to stack these things together as neatly as possible. And next up is these rings, which again is not very difficult, though we made these as a single part, and the main attachment point, which I've selected now, the U-shaped bracket, will be unwrapped separately, while the rest of this piece will have to use the method of the unfolding a loop like we've done before for the splines that you've forgotten to turn the unwrapping on for. Just trying to stitch these things together, turning off normalize, and then just doing a quick flatten. Then again. So let's see if this works. And it's not completely doing it for everything, so something's up. Let's see if we do it multiple times. Looks like not everything is welded here. So the problem we have is that it doesn't want to do this tool when I've deleted the backside. So I'm just going to quickly recreate this to be able to do the unwrap. And I'm also going to split this up because it has problems with that. This is a bit of a hack, right? I'm going to have to adjust the geometry to be able to use a specific unwrap tool. I think it's because this tool is new. It's new in 3D Studio Max, so probably not all the problems are out. Let's hope they fix it by the next version, because this really is one of the best additions to the UV unwrapping tool. So selecting these parts, unfolding them, then quickly doing a planar on this one. And there we go, now it works fine. So if you have spline shapes that are a little bit broken because you deleted, collapsed, attached certain parts, it makes sense to go back and adjust them. Because the main problem is also, it tends to try and unwrap everything that's attached to that spline automatically, and sometimes you might have parts that are physically attaching them all which you don't want to unwrap. So I had to go back in and remove that. And I had to make sure the cross section of the spline was continuous. So that's it for that little part. Next up is this one here. I used a flatten to quickly flatten things out. And just moving them around like that. This one, we should weld these together. That center part there, I'm going to do a few welds as well. And again, just a few welds to make sure that these parts all fit together. Then doing some stacking to make sure that it's in the correct place. I'm going to have to do some welding here again, because when you use flatten, it tends to split up stuff a lot, and I've forgotten to remove some extra edges there, so I'm just double checking. And right here I'm going to have the same problem, so I decide to close this up for now. Go back into the UV editor and select this thing here. And just to have a bit of a clearer view on it, I'm going to do a quick planar map so I don't have this jumbled mess. Once that's done, switching to edge mode, of course turning off element selection, forming a ring, and there we go, that's unwrapped. And now I just have to go over all those separate parts and align them, which we've done before, so I won't be showing you that. Then doing some more flattens and stitches on these existing parts. I'm trying to figure out where this one fits. It's somewhere at the back, so I can put that in that little hole. That one's actually not needed, so I'm going to go back in and delete those once I finish the complete unwrapping. Stitch that one together, move it over there, and then we have another quite messy part here. Looks like the unfold didn't really do that good of a job at it. And one thing to remember with Unfold, it's very annoying. It tends to split up edges that it doesn't need to split up. So you can tell if an edge is, obviously, you'll probably know this, but if an edge is green, it's split up. But some of these edges which you really expect not to be green will be green after a unfold. I can't remember this being very bad in previous versions of Max. It might be that this has become worse in the newest one. So the fix for that is just select every single vertex and hit Ctrl W a few times. So that part's done as well. Then next up is this big bracket for the jerry cans. This is a bit of an annoying one because it has so many like separate small parts. So I'm going to try and stack as much as I can on top of each other to save some UV space. And selecting these things. Looks like they're already detached, so I'm going to have to use the text tool as a line to rotate them. Selecting some extra parts. And just keep stitching things together. Stitch that as well. And this is a bit of an annoying thing to do because it's so small, has so many small parts. If I were making something fictional, I'd probably not even make a detail like this just because it's a bit of a hassle to unwrap and even model. But then again, we're trying to make this bulldozer look like the real thing. And it is an interesting detail on there. So I'm just creating that anyway. The whole point with it being difficult is simply because the silhouette is so complex. And there's like holes in there and small tiny pieces, which does make for an interesting silhouette, but makes for a bit of trouble with the unwrapping and eventually the baking might be a bit of a problem as well. But we'll see about that. So again, just trying to puzzle these things a bit. And you'll notice I use planar projection here more than in other moments. Planar projection can be handy to stack things on top of each other. Like if you have two sides of an object, the left and the right, which you want to share the exact same UV space, and they're perfectly flat, and then you can just select them both at the same time and perform a planar unwrap on them. And they will just be stacked on top of each other from the start. I can't place that one there, so that's a bit annoying. So that's it for that part. Also, you'll notice me dragging those UV islands that I create all the way out to some extreme. Because obviously for now, I'm not working within the nice 0 to 1 unwrapping window. I'm working with all the space I've got. Every single time I unwrap something, like a UV island or just a simple piece, I drag it out somewhere far and I try to keep track in my mind where I've dragged certain parts out to, so I don't stack them all on top of each other by dragging them to the same area. Of course, it's impossible to do this like completely correct. You'll always end up with a few on top of each other, but if you sort of keep track of it in your head by thinking, okay, I've dragged something to the far extreme right before, might want to go to the middle, bottom, whatever, then it makes it easier to puzzle with these things afterwards. So these parts, I'm thinking maybe I can stack a few of these on top of each other, not too sure. Yeah, I'll stack those on top of each other. And then same for these things. Running a relax on them. And this is super annoying. They don't perfectly match up, so I have to go in and align every single one of these vertices by themselves. I absolutely hate doing this, but there's just no other way. I wish there was a tool for this or something, but there isn't, unfortunately. So there you go. Every single one. And with that done, because we had about 4 separate of these things on top of each other, and they were all not really aligned the same way. We've got some more crazy areas here. These things do create some pretty complex UV shapes. I mean, they're hard to actually stack onto each other, or they're hard to puzzle together. You could stack a few of these together, but to combine them in an efficient way, not all that. So again, need to do some aligning here. Like, there's a chance that this wouldn't happen, but apparently my models have slightly offset. There's really barely any way to prevent this. It might just be for no reason other than unwraps being difficult. So with that part done, we're going for the next part, these little attachment bracket plates at the bottom. And there's a few of these like cylinders in there. And I'm just going to do an unwrap for all of them at the same time so they share the same UV space. And trying to unfold these, but the unfolding, it stacked a lot of stuff onto each other, so I'm going to have to move those parts out. Unfold, while the idea is good, it tends to mess up so many times. But in certain cases, it is less work than using flatten, because flatten by default is just going to break everything up in a very, very scattered way. So again, stitching some parts. Obviously, I want to detach this thing first and then stitch it into that part there. So for these things, again, do an unfold, attach them, stitch them together. It's just so random what unfold tends to do sometimes. It tends to put things at 90-degree angles when it should just put them at a different angle, but that's why you have to clean them up manually every time. And again, I think this shows that you really shouldn't rely on automatic unwrapping methods too much. If you hate unwrapping and you want to speed things up, then the main factor where you can speed up is by trying to optimize your own workflow. Don't try to look for magical tools that do everything with one click. I mean, there are a few nice tools that you can use, like text tools, the new Max 2012 unwrap tools, but it's mainly up to you to use these and to improve things. They're definitely not going to add a magic do-it-for-me button. So this part again started off with an unfold and dragging the overlapping areas apart. And trying to decide what I'll do with these. Probably detach them and then stitch them in there. And these parts, I don't really need them, so I'm going to select them, delete them after collapsing the unwrap, and then going back and adding the unwrap on there again. And if you didn't already, a quick way to add the unwrap is open the modifier list, hit U, and hit enter. Because unwrap UV will be the first modifier that starts with a U, so it's a quick way to put it back on there. These things, trying to get them to stitch together in a bit of a logical way, since obviously Unfold hasn't done a very good job of them. And the thing with the stitching is you have to make sure that you detach things. So once again, I'll repeat the hotkey for detaching UV islands. Detaching selected polygons is Control D, D for detach. Makes sense, easy one to use. Now trying to group these together like that. And just puzzling this up as much as I can. That should be about alright. Now we've got this thing here. Looks really jumbled when you do Unfold. Unfold tends to have a lot of problems with more organic round shapes. Unfold does an okay job with squarish pieces. Also, you saw me scale that thing. Scale is something I haven't used before, but the whole reason for that is it's the underside of a part, and you will barely ever see that, but I do need the polygons so you can't see through, so I'm just scaling it together. So there you go. That's the first time I break the rule of actually sticking to a certain scale. If it's a part that you will barely see, but it still needs to be there, the polygon needs to be there, then I'll just go and scale it around. So using a cylindrical unwrap here, and because it's a complex, it's still a cylinder in its essence, but it's a bit of a complex shape. I have to make sure that I tweak these things a bit. Put that one over there. Then for this one, I'm going to deselect those parts. And just a heads up, if you're selecting things for UVs, it really pays off to figure out when to select in the 3D window and when to select in the UV window, because sometimes it's a lot easier to select or deselect parts in the UV window than it is to select them in the actual 3D window. Now next up, some of my least favorite parts, these sort of racks that sit on the side. Very, very annoying to unwrap. Obviously, I'm going to try and share as much of the UV space as possible for these large areas in the center. Same for these parts. I select two at the same time and then do a planar projection on the x-axis so that they will share the same UV space. Obviously, I need to make sure I turn on element selection. And there's a bit of problems. They don't really align perfectly, but it should be good enough, really. Now we have a bunch more of these things to do. And the way I'm selecting these so quickly is, I use this a lot when UVing, is I turn on angle selection. And luckily this time for UVs, they've changed the default to an angle of 0. That means it will only select perfectly coplanar faces, which I think is perfect. So you select all those, hit the planar button, and you've got them all nicely stacked onto each other. So selecting these, just moving them out. These are big, like, main faces. It gets more annoying the further we get because they're all like small, tiny parts. Sometimes planar doesn't do a good job. Sometimes you might need to decide to do a flatten, because flatten actually makes them perfectly straight and flat, while planar might have this slight offset or rotation on there, which is annoying to fix. Again, selecting all of these, just going to stack them on top of each other. And instead of perfectly aligning them, it's a lot quicker to just use use those align buttons at the top there, just 4 times. When it's a simple quad, you can just use them 4 times and it makes a quick job of these things, because it averages all the positions of the 3 vertices every single time and make sure that they're perfectly aligned. If they're the same size, you can get away with doing this. It's pretty much the light and less annoying version of what I did for those cylinders a while back. So I'm trying to stack these on top of each other. And these can actually be stacked. Try and get close, because I don't really feel like doing it on these, the align tools, because they're so small, it's going to be more of a hassle to select them than it is to zoom in and to try and match it as close as possible. So this is a bit what I mean with, like, try to weigh off what the most efficient thing to do is. These will not be as perfect in terms of alignment, but they're so small that it doesn't matter that much. So I'm weighing these things up against each other. Those quads were bigger, so you might have noticed it there. And also there, it wasn't that important, but it was easier to do, so that's why I tried to stick to that one. Moving these parts around, but we still have a bunch of crap left here to do. And these are all the insides, plus those little pieces. So these I'm going to stack onto each other again. And I'm really trying to be very strict with sharing UV space here. Reason for that being, this thing would really use a lot of UV space otherwise, and the only way to keep it down is to share things. And that's like these vertices. Move them slightly closer. And again, I'm trying to do the important ones first and keeping the least important ones for last. The most annoying parts also. Moving that out there. And then, let's see, we've got all of these here. And they're all the insides of those parts. So these can all be shared. So I've just done another unfold there. And it's all stacked them nicely on top of each other. You have to watch out with doing an unfold with multiple selections. It can go wrong, like it has done here. And as it turns out, it's made a bit of a mess of a few of these parts. So what you have to do is you have to, every single one, I'm going to have to manually unfold, because unfold apparently doesn't like to do the same operation on completely similar parts. Just have to go in, select every one of them, and fold them every single time. And just align these so that it sits correctly. And again, this is a very annoying bug that's always been in Macs. Maybe they don't think it's a bug. I think it's fairly annoying that you have to redo this every single time. So I'm going to have to do the same thing at the bottom here. As you can see, selecting these things in UV space is a bit easier because I just drag my mouse out there, and since I know the polygons I want are somewhere completely different on my UV space, I can easily select and deselect them. So I'm going to align these because Folds decided to rotate them in a random manner. As you can see, like I said, these parts, the last ones, very annoying. Go in and do a lot of work for just these simple parts. I almost spend as much work on these simple polygons as I spend on the rest of this part, just because the tools aren't really up for the task. Okay, so this part's done as well, moving it in there. And that's got to be it for this rack. So unfortunately, we've got another one to do, which is going to be the same method for the most part. So again, first selecting the biggest polygons, trying to stack them onto each other because I want to share UV space. These are slightly different in scale, so I'm just going to adjust that a little bit. I'm actually warping them and distorting them, but it saves me UV space, and you will not notice on a straight quad like that one. So the next up are the sides of this part. Selecting that side as well. I've done a flatten before, so a lot of these, because they're fairly boxy shapes, a lot of them are already in the correct orientation, correct UV islands, so I can work with them from the start. These parts will all share the same UV space, so it's time to stack them on top of each other. Some of them might be mirrored, like these are, because they actually sit on the left side compared to the right side. So, got a few more parts aligned there. We're skipping ahead a few steps here because you've seen the whole trick of selecting vertices, aligning them, stacking them on top of each other. Trying to not spend too much time on these things. Because I'll be honest, these parts in the bulldozer, the high poly they took a lot of time for what they are. The low poly they take a lot of time, and in the unwrapping they take a lot of time. So these are, how would I say, not very efficient parts to be working on. Though they do provide a good amount of detail on the bulldozer body, so that's why they're going on. So again, the trick with aligning. And the nice thing with this new version of Max is, in the old one, where you had to get a separate script to work with the align tools that I use all the time, you can only do it for vertices, while now you can also do it for edges and possibly even for polygons, but you might not want to do that because it'll collapse the polygons into a single straight line. So I'll select some more parts. Let's see. Looks like these are correct, so move them on top of each other. These pieces at the bottom, because there's about 3 different dimensions of like rack compartments on there, means I have to, and each of them has two instances. Like there's the big ones at the top, the medium ones at the bottom left, and then there's the small ones at the bottom right. And for every single one, I have to stack the parts that I can stack. But this one's going to end up, even though it's smaller than the other one, it's going to end up unwrapped less efficient just because I really can't share that much stuff. Take these off. And especially with a part with so many pieces here, I'm trying to really stack them together in an efficient block. So for these inner parts, I've done them exactly the same way as the previous one. We're skipping ahead slightly, not showing you everything. If you really want to see that part, just rewind a little bit and watch it again for the first one. So that's it for this annoying thing. And I've colored all the parts that I've unwrapped orange. And right now, it's time to start puzzling, actually. So you see, I have a lot of stuff that is just all around the place. And I'm going to start moving them together and trying to create an unwrap here. You can see that some of it's already been puzzled together. Nothing too difficult to do. Also going to get rid of the pieces that I can mirror afterwards. Because again, for the unwrap, they need to be instanced also, and these things were not instanced. So, grabbing these parts, puzzling them together. And very important, I'll just repeat this again, don't change the scale on these things yet. I'm still puzzling them in their world scale. If you don't know why I call this world scale, well, it's because the actual size of these things in the unwrap window is the size they have in the world. So unwrap space normally works between 0 and 1, but if your bulldozer is 500 units long and you use the world scale, it's going to use an UV parts that are scaled up to 500 units long. But it does mean that everything is consistent with its relative scale in the world. So again, I'm trying to stick to that scale, and I'm just puzzling these parts together a bit. We've skipped ahead slightly, but the whole idea behind this is I want to stack these together in a square shape as much as possible. For now, I'm still a little bit on the fence how I'm going to unwrap this. I can either have 2 square sheets, one for the body and everything, and then one for the extra details like the blade and the ripper. So for now, for the body parts, I'm all unwrapping these with a square layout. You can see me break some things apart. There's not really a problem with that. I'm just making sure that I can unwrap these as efficient as I can by taking them apart. So I'm just moving them around. It means you might go in and take apart a layout for an island that you've created before, but that really isn't that much of a problem. Also, in doing this sort of puzzling, it really helps to turn on element, like UV element subselection, where if you select one polygon, it's going to select all of the attached ones. Definitely makes it easier to work with this sort of thing. So we're going to put that one in there. Really trying to fill up some holes with this thing, because otherwise the holes would just be wasted UV space. So these, let's see, I think I can put those in there. Actually going to take that one out. Trying to put the biggest things I can fit in there, because it's just more efficient to do that. Looks like I filled almost all the holes now. So with that done, taking these parts, and still trying to group things together in a bit of a logical way. So I'm going to fit these there. So we're going to fit that one in there. Then these should fit in nicely here. I have a few more to do. Well, maybe I'll try and get these in here. Because of that angle there, they'll fit nicely. And this isn't the best fit, so I'm going to try and move them up a little bit. Rotate this one so it fits a little bit better. And that should be about right. Now, a few more parts right here. Yeah, there we go. And that's it for the window frames. So I've decided to have 3 separate unwraps for the windows, so 3 of those, so I can have 3 variations of glass texture. And again, trying to place these things together. I'm just picking puzzle pieces here and trying to fit them in the best possible places. Grab that. Move it over there. This one, I might have to take some blocks apart to fit them together a bit more efficient. And as you can see, I'm trying to stick to a square shape. It's not perfectly square yet, but I'll adjust this once we start trying to actually fit it into a square window. There's some room for this small thing. And then, again, I'm making sure that the parts that share UV space are actual instances. If they're not an instance, then, well, you've got a problem then, because it's not going to be actually sharing the UV space. So you're best off just deleting the uninstanced parts and then recreating them by grabbing the original one and just simply instancing it. Because if you don't do this, if you don't make sure they're all instances, you're going to have problems later with your UVs. So we've got all of these main parts done, but I think there should be a few more attached here. So we've got these chimneys that we have to do. They're not very hard, they're just cylindrical pieces, especially the bottom part is not hard. The top one that's slightly tapered, we need to put some more effort in that. So just a quick flatten to see what we have, and it's easy to separate the parts, and so I'm selecting these, see what an unfold does, and I don't like it that much, but so we're going to try a cylindrical, make sure to turn off normalize, and that looks about right. I've got to make sure to rotate so that the seam for the cylinder is sitting somewhere where you can't really see it that much. Then select the top part, and I feel like I don't really need that the bottom piece. It's not that important in the unwrap. I should straighten these out also. They look like they're slightly a bit wobbly, so just going to quickly use the straighten tool. And then select these vertices on the side and just try and weld them so that they're attached. So, well, it's not really working, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. Alright, then next up we have that top part, should be a flat map. And we're going to grab all these side parts here. See what happens with an unfold. Don't really expect much, and yeah, there you go, that's not really something we can use as an unwrap. So I'm going to have to find a different way. I'll probably do, yeah, the cylindrical looks about right. Looks like something I can work with. I'm going to scale these things out a bit. Why? Well, because it's a tapered shape, so you have to scale them a bit to account for distortion. And again, that thing is not welding, so we'll just leave it. UVs can be a bit finicky there sometimes. Like one vert like that is not really a problem if you leave it. So the other chimney was also done. We've skipped slightly ahead, and we're going to pack them together with all the rest of these things right now. I'm moving some packing around again because, well, I've got some new pieces and I have to make sure that everything fits together, so nothing is stopping me from just reorganizing things a bit. I feel like I also need to pull this piece apart, and like always, the further you get with the UV puzzling, the more that you have to actually pull apart your little puzzle pieces and split them and try and spread things. We can get that one in there with a bit more tweaking that I'm not necessarily showing. So I'm doing the smoothing groups from UV shells here, but it only works if you select a separate object. It's too bad it doesn't work on all of them. So I see that with the smoothing groups from UV shells, I have a few problematic areas where the shading is just pushing its luck a bit too far. I can't really deal with that. That's going to give me problems when I bake. So I'm splitting up the UV islands, and I'm doing this so that my normals will bake correctly. And this thing here also, I've got a bit of a problem. There was a duplicate vert there, so I just went in and welded that. Splitting a few more parts. And this is a bit the unfortunate thing. I'll admit that this is an older method that I'm using. There are newer methods where you have matched up tangent spaces, but for now, the situation at the moment of creating this DVD, you have to do this thing to get it into UDK, and we're going to get this into UDK eventually, so that's why I have to split up my UV islands to match the smoothing groups. There's just no other way for me to get a reliable and an acceptable result into UDK. So I'm just checking here and there. Trying to detach this thing and scale it down a little bit. It's a little trick to do the same here. Like when you do this thing, like detach it and then scale it down slightly at its current position, you are creating some seams, but they're not that bad. You have to make sure that you leave enough space between these two parts. If you barely leave any space, well, there's no point because you need some pixel padding area to fix the smoothing of these hard edges. But you can get away with such a thing. I'm just going to go over a few of these pieces and just keep doing the smoothing groups from UV shells. And see that here's a problem. These things, they weren't welded correctly, so I have to go into the UVs and select the verts, Control W, and detach a few of these just to make sure that we've already got everything set up correctly. And then just do it again. So the whole point is you just keep going over everything and do the smooth groups from UV shells, and then just see if the low poly shading isn't being pushed too far, if it's just not asking too much where you get these artifacts like that. That's the differential or transmission at the back of the bulldozer. It just looks like it's really trying to do too much with what we have as a model. So for that, I simply go into the UVs again and detach a few parts. See if I can improve it a little bit. So these things, I agree, they're a bit hacky, but the whole problem is that the tangent space for which the normal maps are baked in Max, or any other program actually, does not match up with UDK. Epic has not released their plugin for XNormal as far as I know, which I think is what they use, I've been told, and there is just no other program that matches up with UDK, so we have to try and alleviate the work that the normal map has to do as much as possible by splitting things up with smoothing groups. Because if you have this really harsh artifacted shading, like this part for example, then your normal map has to do a lot of work, and the more work your normal map has to do, the more obvious the errors and problems will be. So that's why I'm trying to reduce the amount of work that the normal map has to do. So just quickly moving these pieces around a bit so that I've got instances. There we are. And just realigning them so I've got the correct instances. And as you can see, smooth groups from UV shells are looking a bit shoddy. So I'm going to have to go in and fix that. I'm just making sure they're instances first, because if I want to fix them, I want to make sure all my instances update. I'm collapsing all the current smoothing group layouts. I've got about 4 different parts or something here. Not too sure. We'll see. So we're going into the smoothing groups. I'm selecting them all at the same time so that I can actually modify the stacked UVs. Very, very important, because these are supposed to share UVs. So if I'm going to pull them apart, to make sure I do them all at the same time, so I'm not getting mismatched shared UVs. So pulling these pieces apart a bit. This is a really tiny piece, but it's hard to move them apart really far because things have already been packed. So these, probably up close, you'll start seeing the hard edge, but far from a little bit further away, they'll be just fine. And again, they're not that big, so it should be okay really. And doing the smoothing groups again, that's worked as well. Again, we have to fix up the windows. Like, all of these are attached, but they're just asking too much from our shading. I have to take them apart. Move this out a bit. So just select polygons, hit Ctrl D, and move them outwards from the edge that they were previously attached to. Ctrl D. So we don't have much more to go here. We've pretty much done most of them. These are the final parts that I'm moving out. And with that done, we should be pretty much there for the dozer body.